Revenge films.
I had been a victim of domestic violence from my ex-husband and had returned to my parents' home to take refuge. Living there where my father had passed away, my older brother and his wife, their kids were already grown and out of the house, and my younger brother, who was in his 40s and had been single until last year. After moving back, I realized something shocking. My mother was what you'd call a classic nightmare mother-in-law. She had been tormenting my older brother's wife, and even when he tried to intervene, it didn't seem to help. Then my younger brother met a woman at the gym, a woman in her late 30s, and decided to marry her. After their wedding, they moved out. That's when my mom turned her attention to meddling in their lives, too. My younger brother's wife is a doctor who graduated from the National Defense Medical College. She's sturdy, calm, and reserved, with a background worlds apart from my mom's. She grew up on a farm, while my mom was a city girl who loved shopping and fashion. She just couldn't understand why her son chose someone like her. "I just don't get why he chose someone like her," my mom would often complain. "If it were up to me, he could have had so many better options. I must have such bad luck. She must have tricked him." She'd grumble constantly. The reality is, my younger brother worked in sales for a subsidiary of a manufacturing company, lived at home well into his 40s, and had no savings. If anyone was to blame for not getting married sooner, it was him. His wife, on the other hand, might have had plain style, but she was the kind of woman who looks effortlessly cool, with a clean and polished vibe. She's not unattractive at all, yet my mother would say things to her like, "You are terrible at makeup, aren't you? When you look so plain, it makes my son look bad too, so try harder, okay? And just because you're decent at your job doesn't mean you're a complete woman. If you can't handle housework, you're not good enough. Do you get that?" Even in front of me, my mother displayed some seriously toxic mother-in-law behavior. And my younger brother, despite knowing his wife was being mistreated, he was too caught up in the sudden attention from our mom, who had always favored the brilliant eldest son until now, so he didn't do anything to stop her. He even started buying into her narrative, and he had mentally rewritten himself as the poor guy stuck marrying an older, plain woman who threw herself at him. Watching all this, I was constantly on edge. I couldn't stop worrying about how things would turn out, and I felt so sorry for my sister-in-law. I couldn't help but feel guilty, too, for the situation she was in. Things got even worse after my younger brother and his wife moved into the 4-bedroom Riverside Tower apartment near the station that my sister-in-law had been renting out until then. She had bought it during her single years as a form of savings, and since she had worked in different regions, she rented it out. When my mom saw the apartment, she went completely off the rails, dreaming of a luxurious co-living arrangement in the city. She started showing up uninvited almost daily, cooking meals for my younger brother, attempting to redecorate the apartment, and generally behaving like she owned the place. Even though it was my sister-in-law's apartment, my mother started saying things like, "It may have been your apartment at first, but now that you're married, it belongs to my son, and that means it's mine, too. Of course, I should be able to do whatever I want with it. You're always working, neglecting my son, so I'll just have to live here with you. You should be grateful. Oh, and naturally, when I need care in the future, you'll be the one to take care of me. That's what a daughter-in-law is for. You're good for nothing but work, so just work yourself to the bone for me and my son." She said all this to both my sister-in-laws and us. My older brother and his wife just stayed out of it, and no matter how much I tried to intervene, it didn't matter. After all, why would they listen to the loser daughter who had moved back home? Meanwhile, my younger brother was loving the attention from our mom and didn't stop her. For 6 months, this chaos continued. Through it all, my sister-in-law remained calm, never fighting back. My mom, getting frustrated, said during the summer break when everyone had gathered, "I've told you over and over since you married into this family, you need to quickly change the ownership of the apartment to your husband's name. People are looking at him with disapproval because it's still under your name." In reality, no one cares whose name the property is in, so there's no way he's being looked at like that. I think she just wanted to have the control she'd have if the apartment were in my younger brother's name, and she probably thought it would be easier to kick his wife out if it came to that. My younger brother's wife, hearing this, simply said, "I'm sorry," and lowered her head. My younger brother, looking flustered, said nothing. My older brother and I tried to intervene, but since my younger brother's wife didn't react, there was no argument. And we moved on to the dinner preparation. While my younger brother's wife and my older brother's wife were cooking, my mom kept grumbling, so I ended up yelling at her to stop. My older brother's wife, seeming to think she would be safe as long as my mother went to my younger brother's wife, whispered to my mom, "Why don't you live with the sweet younger sister-in-law, Mom?" The atmosphere in the kitchen was thick with tension. Then, holding a kitchen knife, my younger brother's wife quietly said with a smile, "The only reason I was able to go to university was because my mother caused a scene with a sharp knife." As she grinned, we were all shocked. "My family was one where women didn't need an education, and I wasn't even allowed to read the newspaper, so there was no way I could go to university. But my mother, with a fierce look on her face, threatened my grandfather, saying, 'If you don't let her go to university, I will stab you and this child, and then I'll die too.' And my grandfather actually had his arm cut. Whenever I slacked off in my studies, my mother would threaten me with the same terrifying look and say, 'Do you want me to stab you and die?' I studied like my life depended on it. After seeing my grandfather's blood, I truly thought I was going to be killed, and I was so scared I couldn't sleep at home." We were all stunned by the sudden, outrageous story from my younger brother's wife, frozen with our mouths hanging open. Meanwhile, she kept smiling and said, "When I left home, my mother told me, 'Don't ever come back. Build your own wealth with your own money, and if anyone tries to take it from you, fight like you're going to kill them.' I haven't seen her much since then." After that, she turned to my mom and said, "Also, about you, Mom." What is it?" "You make it sound like living together and taking care of the elderly is easy, but unless you're prepared, it's not. My mother was the kind of daughter-in-law who was beaten by my grandparents when she was young, even having her face and fingers broken, and they didn't let her go to the hospital. Yet she still took care of them at home until the very end." "Wow, that's amazing." "My mother worked so hard. My grandmother used to be really selfish and made things hard for her every day, but over time, it started happening less and less. I guess my grandmother, being old, started out by causing trouble and making my mother's life difficult. But when my mother tried to stop her, my mother must have used too much force and accidentally broke my grandmother's hand. Old people's bones are fragile after all." After that, my mom, my sister-in-law, and I were all silent. Meanwhile, my younger brother's wife, with a slight smile at the corner of her mouth, kept chopping the vegetables decisively. During the meal, my mother was still acting uneasy, but my younger brother's wife, with her usual gentle smile, took care of my younger brother, who was completely unaware, with such attentive care. Her mother must have taught her, through her own experience, to earn everything she needed to live on her own. She had the courage to be disliked and even kicked out of the house to make sure her daughter became independent. The depth of her mother's love, her willingness to risk everything to raise her daughter, really moved me. I was quietly touched by the way my younger brother's wife's mother had put her whole heart into raising her daughter. I was really impressed by my younger brother's wife's strength in breaking the cycle of dysfunction in her family-in-law all on her own. From that point, I decided I wouldn't dwell on the past and the domestic violence anymore, and I made up my mind to follow her example. I found a job quickly and I moved out. A lot of time passed, and when I went back to my parents' house after a year, I was shocked by how much my mom had shrunk, both physically and emotionally. She was now focused on taking care of my younger brother's wife. I guess after imagining what her future might look like, she was so horrified that she decided to change. My younger brother, after hearing about what happened from my sister-in-law, seemed to have woken up. He started trying to show off what a good husband he was to his wife. As for how my mom will be taken care of in the future, I have no idea. But we all get old, and it's coming eventually. We certainly don't have the money to put her in a care facility. So it'll be interesting to see if she can redeem herself before that happens. All she can do is try her best to make sure her daughter-in-law likes her so she doesn't end up regretting it.
How was today's video? If you enjoyed it, please subscribe, like, and leave a comment. Stay tuned for more.